The war had lasted for 12 years. 12 long years of blood, fire, and the cold silence of space filled with the wreckage of broken ships. The Velthari Empire had started it, or so the humans believed. The Velthari believed the humans had started it. Nobody remembered exactly how the first shots were fired anymore. What everyone remembered was the dying. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of the Human Coalition flagship, the Eternal Dawn, and looked at the holographic display showing the latest battle reports. Red dots marked destroyed human ships. Blue dots marked destroyed Velthari ships. There were so many dots of both colors that the display looked like a child's painting gone wrong. 37 ships lost in the Kepler sector, reported Commander Jackson, his voice tired. The Velthari lost 42, but they have more ships to lose than we do. Chen Wei nodded slowly. This was the truth that nobody wanted to say out loud. Humanity was running out of ships, running out of soldiers, running out of time. The Velthari Empire controlled over 200 star systems. Humanity controlled only 31, and 3 of those were under constant attack. What about the civilian evacuation from New Shanghai? Chen Wei asked. 70% complete. We need another 3 days. We don't have 3 days. The Velthari fleet will arrive in 36 hours. This was how it had been for the past year. Running, fighting, dying. Humanity was losing the war and everyone knew it. The Human Coalition Council had met in secret last week and Chen Wei had heard the whispers. Some wanted to surrender. Others wanted to fight to the last human. Nobody had any good ideas. The Admiral walked to the window and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, his wife waited on Earth with their 2 daughters. They sent him messages every week, telling him about school and friends and the small moments of normal life. He kept those messages in a folder on his personal computer. Some nights when the weight of command was too heavy, he read them again and again. On the Velthari homeworld of Velth Prime, Grand Commander Thexrel stood in the war chamber and faced a similar display. His scales, normally a proud purple, had turned gray with stress and age. The war was killing him slowly, just as it was killing his people. The humans destroyed our supply convoy near the Orion Passage, reported Subcommander Krelta. 40,000 tons of food and medical supplies. Gone. Thexrel's clawed hand tightened on the railing. How many systems are now facing food shortages? 17, Grand Commander. The outer colonies are beginning to starve. This was the curse of empire. The Velthari had grown too fast, spread too wide, and now they could not feed all their people. The war was supposed to be quick. The humans were supposed to be weak, divided, easy to conquer. Instead, they had proven to be stubborn, creative, and willing to die rather than surrender. Our fleet commanders want to push for a final assault on Earth, Krelta continued. They believe we can end the war in one strike. And lose half our remaining ships in the process, Thexrel said quietly. Even if we win, we will be so weak that the Draknar Confederacy will move against us within a year. We will trade one enemy for another. This was the truth that the War Hawks refused to see. The galaxy was not empty. Other powers watched and waited. The Draknar had been enemies of the Velthari for centuries. They would not let such an opportunity pass. Thexrel thought of his daughter, Velria. She was 32 years old now, working in the diplomatic corps because she believed in talking instead of fighting. He had once been disappointed in her choice. Now he wondered if she had been the wise one all along. In a small room on a space station called Haven's Rest, a human woman named Dr. Sarah Chen was doing something unusual. She was studying Velthari culture. Not their weapons, not their military tactics, but their poetry, their philosophy, their dreams. Dr. Chen was not related to Admiral Chen Wei, though they shared a surname and a stubborn determination to do what they thought was right. She was a xenoanthropologist, one of the few who had survived the war by hiding in neutral territory. For 5 years, she had collected every piece of Velthari literature, art, and music she could find. "They're not monsters," she said to herself as she read a Velthari poem about the joy of watching a sunrise over their homeworld. "They're just people, different but people." Her assistant, a young man named Marcus, looked up from his computer. "With respect, Doctor, they've killed millions of humans." "And we've killed millions of them," Sarah replied. "Does that make us monsters?" Marcus had no answer for that. Dr. Chen had been working on a project for the past 2 years, a secret project that she had shared with only a handful of people. She called it the Understanding Initiative. It was simple in concept but revolutionary in practice. She wanted to find a way to end the war that didn't involve one side destroying the other. "The problem," she had written in her research notes, "is that both sides believe they can still win, and both sides are wrong. The humans cannot defeat the Velthari Empire. The Velthari cannot occupy human space without destroying themselves in the process. We are locked in a death spiral, and someone needs to show both sides the door." That someone, she had decided, would be her. The message arrived on Admiral Chen Wei's desk 3 months before the Battle of New Shanghai. It was marked as coming from a research station in neutral territory, and it carried the highest civilian priority code. Normally, he would have ignored it. He was a military man fighting a war. He did not have time for civilian matters. But something about the subject line caught his eye: how to win the war by ending it. He opened the message and began to read. 3 hours later, he was still reading. His cold tea sat forgotten beside him. His scheduled meetings had been canceled. When he finally looked up, his eyes were different. Something that might have been hope flickered in them for the first time in years. "Get me a secure channel to the Coalition Council," he ordered, "and find out everything you can about a Dr. Sarah Chen." At the same time, across the vast emptiness of space, a similar message was making its way through Velthari communication networks. It was addressed to anyone in the Velthari leadership who was tired of war. It spoke of peace, but not the peace of surrender. It spoke of something else entirely. The message reached Grand Commander Thexrel through an unlikely source, his daughter, Velria, who worked in the diplomatic corps. She brought it to him late one night, when the war chamber was empty and the weight of command felt heaviest. "You should read this, Father," she said softly. "It is from a human." "I have no interest in human propaganda." "It is not propaganda, it is something else, something new." Thexrel took the data chip reluctantly. He expected lies, manipulation, the usual tricks of war. What he found instead made him sit down heavily in his chair, his scales slowly shifting from gray to a lighter purple as he read. "This human," he said finally, "is either a fool or a genius." "Perhaps both," Velria suggested. The seeds of peace had been planted, but seeds need water, sunlight, and time to grow. And in the darkness of war, all three were in short supply. The war continued, ships burned, soldiers died, but in the quiet spaces between battles something was changing. Messages passed between unlikely contacts, questions were asked, answers were given. Slowly, carefully, the impossible began to seem possible. Dr. Sarah Chen had set something in motion that would change the galaxy forever. She just didn't know it yet. The Coalition Council met in a bunker deep beneath Earth's surface. The original council chambers in Geneva had been destroyed in a Velthari orbital strike 4 years ago, and humanity's leaders had learned to hide. The bunker was cold, poorly lit, and smelled of recycled air. Nobody complained. At least they were alive. Council President Maria Santos sat at the head of the table, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face lined with the weight of decisions that had cost millions of lives. Around her sat the representatives of humanity's remaining governments, military leaders, and advisors. All of them looked tired. All of them looked old, even the young ones. "Admiral Chen Wei has submitted a proposal," Santos announced. "He calls it the Understanding Initiative. It comes from a civilian researcher named Dr. Sarah Chen." Another surrender plan? Asked General Morrison, his voice bitter. He had lost 2 sons in the war. Their pictures sat on his desk, and he looked at them every morning. He had promised their mother he would make the Velthari pay. No, something different. Admiral Chen Wei himself flew to Haven's Rest to meet with this researcher. He believes we should hear her proposal. A holographic image flickered to life in the center of the table, and Dr. Sarah Chen appeared. She was younger than most of the council members expected, perhaps 40 years old, with kind eyes that seemed out of place in a war council. "Thank you for this opportunity," Sarah began. "I will not waste your time with speeches. Here is the simple truth. We cannot win this war by fighting. Neither can the Velthari. If we continue, both civilizations will be destroyed, and other powers will divide what remains between them." "We know this," Morrison said impatiently. "What is your point?" "My point, General, is that there is another way. Not victory through destruction, but victory through creation. I propose we offer the Velthari something they cannot refuse, a solution to their real problems, in exchange for a solution to ours." The room fell silent. Santos leaned forward. "Explain." Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment she had worked toward for years. "The Velthari Empire is dying, not from our attacks but from their own success. They expanded too fast, conquered too many worlds, and now they cannot feed their people. Their supply lines are stretched across 200 star systems, and they are breaking." "Good," Morrison said. "Let them starve." "If they starve, General, they will become desperate. Desperate enemies are the most dangerous kind. They will throw everything they have at Earth, not to win, but to make sure we lose too. Billions will die on both sides." Morrison fell silent. He thought of his grandchildren, born during the war, who had never known a sky without fear. "But there is another possibility," Sarah continued. "The Velthari need efficient food production. They need agricultural technology that can work on marginal worlds. They need the ability to grow crops in poor soil, recycle water perfectly, and maximize nutrition from minimal resources." "We have that technology," said Dr. Ibrahim, the council's science advisor. "Exactly. We developed it because we had to. Earth's population grew beyond what traditional farming could support. We learned to make deserts bloom and oceans yield harvests. The Velthari never developed this technology because they never needed to. They simply conquered more worlds when they needed more food." Santos nodded slowly. "So we offer them our agricultural technology in exchange for peace." "That is only the beginning," Sarah said. "The Velthari have something we need desperately: medical technology. Their genetic science is 3 centuries ahead of ours. They can cure diseases we cannot even diagnose. They live, on average, twice as long as humans, not because of their biology, but because of their medicine." The council members looked at each other. Everyone in the room knew someone who had died of cancer, of heart disease, of the 100 ailments that human medicine still struggled to treat. Morrison himself had watched his wife die slowly from a blood disease that Velthari medicine could have cured in a week. "You are proposing a trade," Santos said. "Technology for technology, peace through mutual benefit." "More than that," Sarah replied. "I am proposing a partnership. The Velthari are strong in biology, genetics, and medicine. We are strong in engineering, agriculture, and computer systems. Together, we could accomplish things that neither species could achieve alone." "This is naive," Morrison interrupted, but his voice was less certain than before. "The Velthari hate us. They will never agree." "I have been in contact with elements within the Velthari government," Sarah said quietly. "There are those who are tired of war. There are those who see the truth I have described. One of them is Grand Commander Thexrel himself." This caused an uproar. Everyone spoke at once. Santos had to strike the table several times to restore order. "You have been in contact with the enemy Supreme Commander," Morrison demanded. I have been in contact with a father who does not want his children to die in a war that cannot be won, Sarah corrected. Yes, he is our enemy, but he is also a rational being who loves his people, and he is listening. The debate lasted for 6 hours. Arguments were made and countered. Fears were expressed and addressed. Old wounds were opened and examined. In the end, President Santos called for a vote. All in favor of authorizing Dr. Chen to continue her initiative and begin formal negotiations. The vote was close. 7 in favor, 5 against. General Morrison was one of the 5 against, but when he left the chamber, he stopped at the door and looked back at Sarah's holographic image. "I hope you're right," he said quietly. "God help us all if you're wrong." On Velth Prime, Grand Commander Thexrel faced his own council, and the arguments were even more fierce. The War Hawks screamed for blood. The traditionalists demanded honor through battle, but Thexrel had something they did not: the support of the common people. The Velthari citizens were tired of war. They were tired of watching their sons and daughters return in coffins, or not return at all. They were tired of food rationing, of empty markets, of the endless fear that humans would appear in their skis with fire and death. Thexrel played them the human woman's message, not in the war chamber, but on every screen in the Empire. "Listen," he commanded his people. "Listen to what our enemy offers. Then tell me, is this not better than more dying?" The reaction surprised even Thexrel. Millions of messages flooded the government servers, and the vast majority said the same thing: peace. Give us peace. Any peace. The Warhawks found themselves suddenly silent. They could demand blood, but they could not demand it louder than the voices of mothers who had lost children, of workers who had lost homes, of an entire civilization that had lost its way. A secret meeting was arranged on a neutral space station at the edge of Velthari territory. Dr. Sarah Chen would represent humanity. Grand Commander Thexrel's daughter, Velria, would represent the Velthari Empire. They would meet, talk, and see if peace was possible. The station was called Crossroads, and it had been built by the Neutral Marani Collective specifically for such meetings. It was small, uncomfortable, and designed so that neither side could gain a military advantage. The perfect place for enemies to become something else. Sarah Chen arrived first, alone except for a small security detail that she ordered to remain on her ship. She spent an hour walking through the empty corridors, thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. The books she had read, the poems she had translated, the sleepless nights wondering if she was crazy to believe peace was possible. Velria arrived an hour later, also alone. She had argued with her father for days about this meeting. He wanted to send soldiers with her. She refused. "If I cannot trust a human who wants peace," she had told him, "then there can be no peace." They met in a plain room with a single table, 2 chairs, and a window looking out at the stars. "I expected someone older," Velria said in careful human standard. Her scales were pale blue, which Sarah knew indicated nervousness. "I expected someone more official," Sarah replied with a small smile. "My father thought a diplomat might be seen as a trick. A daughter is harder to distrust. And yet here you are, trusting me." Velria's scales shifted slightly toward purple. "I have read your work, Dr. Chen, all of it. The poetry you collected, the cultural analysis, the history. You see us as people, not as enemies. That is rare among humans. It is rare among anyone in wartime." They sat down across from each other. Outside the window, the stars were silent witnesses to this moment that might change everything. "My father has a question," Velria said. "He asks, how can we trust that humanity will not use peace to rebuild and then attack again?" Sarah had expected this question. She had an answer ready. How can we trust that the Velthari will not do the same? The answer is that we cannot. Trust must be built, not given. That is why my proposal is not for a simple peace treaty. It is for something deeper: integration, cooperation. making our civilization so connected that war becomes impossible. That is a bold vision. It is the only vision that ends in anything other than destruction. They talked for 8 hours that first day. They talked about history, about fear, about hope. They talked about the children who would inherit whatever future they created. Velria spoke of her younger brother, killed in a human attack 3 years ago. Sarah spoke of her father, a doctor who had died trying to save wounded soldiers on a transport ship that was destroyed. They both cried, neither apologized for it. By the end, something had changed between them. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of trust. "Tell your father," Sarah said as they prepared to leave, "that humanity is ready to stop fighting. We are ready to start building. If the Velthari are ready too, then perhaps we can build something together that neither of us could build alone." Velria nodded. Her scales had turned fully purple, the Velthari color of hope. The seeds of peace had begun to sprout. The negotiations took 8 months. They were difficult, frustrating, and several times came close to complete collapse. But they continued, and slowly, painfully, an agreement began to take shape. Dr. Sarah Chen moved to the Crossroads station permanently. Velria did the same. They became, if not friends, then something close to it. Colleagues working toward a shared goal. 2 women from different species, trying to save both their peoples from themselves. The military commanders are the hardest to convince, Sarah admitted one evening as they shared a meal in the station's small cafeteria. She had learned to appreciate Velthari food, especially the sweet bread they called Velnok. "On both sides," Velria agreed. "My father faces constant pressure from the war hawks. They call him a coward, a traitor. They say he dishonors the empire. General Morrison calls me worse things. He sent a message last week calling me a naive fool who will doom humanity with her softness." Velria made a sound that Sarah had learned was Velthari laughter. "Perhaps we should introduce them. They could hate together." The joke was weak, but Sarah laughed anyway. Laughter was rare these days. Any laughter was precious. The main sticking points in the negotiations were predictable: territory, reparations, war crimes. How do you divide space between 2 peoples who both claim the same stars? How do you compensate families who have lost everything? How do you judge acts committed in the madness of war? Sarah proposed something radical. Instead of dividing territory, share it. Instead of reparations, joint investment. Instead of war crimes tribunals, truth and reconciliation councils. "Neither side can admit they were wrong," she explained to a joint committee of human and Velthari representatives. "Pride will not allow it, but both sides can admit that the war was wrong, that it hurt everyone, that we all want it to end." "This sounds like avoiding justice," growled Admiral Zelkrin, one of the Velthari military representatives. "Justice for whom?" Sarah asked. "If we try every soldier who killed an enemy, we will be holding trials for a century. Our grandchildren will still be prosecuting our great-grandparents. Is that justice, or is it just revenge wearing a nicer name? What do you propose instead?" "Acknowledgement, memory, a monument in the center of shared space listing the names of every being killed in this war. Human and Velthari, side by side, equal in death as we should have been equal in life. Let that be our justice. Let our children look at those names and swear that it will never happen again." The proposal was controversial. Many wanted blood, wanted punishment, wanted someone to pay for all the suffering. But slowly, gradually, the logic of peace began to overcome the emotion of war. There was a moment, 3 months into the negotiations, when everything almost fell apart. A human extremist group attacked a Velthari supply ship, killing 47 crew members. The Velthari delegation walked out of the talks. War hawks on both sides called for renewed fighting. Sarah worked without sleep for 3 days. She called every contact she had, begged every leader who would listen, pleaded with both sides to stay at the table. Velria did the same on her side. On the fourth day, Grand Commander Thexrel made a public statement. "The actions of a few will not destroy the hope of many," he said. "We will continue to seek peace." President Santos responded within the hour. "The attackers do not represent humanity. They represent only fear and hate. We stand with the Velthari people in condemning this act, and we will continue the negotiations." The talks resumed. The moment passed, but everyone involved knew how fragile the process was. One wrong move, one angry word, and everything could collapse. The final treaty was called the Crossroads Accord. It was signed on the anniversary of the first battle of the war, 12 years and 4 months after the first shots were fired. The signing ceremony was broadcast to every planet in both human and Velthari space. President Santos signed for humanity, her hand steady despite her age. Grand Commander Thexrel signed for the Velthari Empire, his scales glowing bright purple for the first time in years. They shook hands afterward, the first formal contact between leaders of the two species that did not involve weapons. "This is not an ending," Santos said in her speech afterward. "It is a beginning. We have been enemies for 12 years. It will take longer than that to become friends. But today we take the first step." Thexrel spoke next, his translator rendering his words in human standard. "The Velthari have a saying: the strongest bridge is built by those who once stood on opposite shores. Today, we begin building that bridge. May it carry our children to a future we could not imagine." The celebrations lasted for days on both sides. There was dancing in the streets of Earth and singing in the halls of Velth Prime. For the first time in over a decade, parents put their children to bed without fear of attack in the night. But Sarah Chen did not celebrate. She sat alone in her quarters on Crossroads Station, looking at the stars and thinking about all the work still to be done. Peace was signed, but peace was fragile. It would take constant effort to maintain. "You should be down there," Velria said, entering without knocking. They had become close enough for such informality. "You are a hero to both our peoples now." "I am no hero. I am just a woman who read too much poetry." Velria sat beside her. "That is what makes you a hero. Heroes do not see themselves as such. They simply do what must be done." Sarah smiled tiredly. "There is so much more to do: the technology exchanges, the joint settlements, the mixed schools where human and Velthari children will learn together, 1,000 details that will take years to work out." "And you will work them out. We will work them out together." "We." Velria's scales flushed pale purple. "My father has asked me to be the Velthari ambassador to the new Joint Council. I requested to be posted wherever you are working." Sarah felt something warm bloom in her chest. "I would like that." The first year of peace was hard. Old hatreds did not die easily. There were protests on both sides, demands to restart the war, accusations of betrayal. A human extremist group attacked a Velthari diplomatic mission, killing 3. A Velthari splinter fleet raided a human colony, killing dozens before being stopped by their own people. But each crisis was met with calm determination. Human and Velthari leaders stood together, condemned the violence together, mourned together. The message was clear: we are past this. We will not go back. General Morrison, who had voted against the peace talks, surprised everyone by becoming one of its strongest defenders. "I lost 2 sons in the war," he said in a public address. "I wanted revenge. I wanted the Velthari to suffer as I suffered, but then I thought about what my sons would want. They were good men, kind men. They would have wanted peace. They would have wanted their children to grow up without fear. So I support this accord, not because I have forgiven our enemies, but because I honor my sons." The technology exchanges began 6 months after the treaty was signed. Human agricultural experts traveled to Velthari colony worlds and taught them to grow food in ways they had never imagined. Within a year, the food shortages that had plagued the empire began to ease. Velthari medical teams arrived on Earth and human colonies with cures for diseases that had killed millions, cancer treatments that took days instead of years, genetic therapies that repaired birth defects before a child could suffer. The average human lifespan began to climb almost immediately. But the exchanges were not just about technology, they were about understanding. Human students studied Velthari philosophy and came back changed, with new perspectives on life and death. Velthari artists discovered human music and created fusion works that moved both species to tears. Scientists from both civilizations worked together on problems neither could solve alone, making breakthroughs that would have taken centuries in isolation. Admiral Chen Wei, now retired from the military, became an unlikely advocate for Velthari culture. He had spent 12 years fighting them, learning to hate them. Now he spent his time learning to understand them. He even adopted a young Velthari orphan whose parents had been killed in a human attack. The child, named Kelvin, grew up speaking both human standard and Velthari, at home in both worlds. "I killed so many of them," Chen Wei told a journalist in an interview. "I thought I knew who they were. I was wrong. They are not monsters. They are just people like us trying to survive. The real monsters were the ones on both sides who wanted the war to continue, who profited from the killing, who could not imagine any other way." Grand Commander Thexrel stepped down from his position 2 years after the treaty, citing age and a desire to spend time with his grandchildren. His final address to the Velthari people was broadcast across both civilizations. "I have been a warrior all my life," he said. "I have killed more humans than I can count. I am not proud of this, but I am proud of this. I chose peace when I could have chosen more war. I chose life when I could have chosen death. This is my legacy, not the battles won but the war ended." He was given the highest civilian honor in both human and Velthari culture. He spent his remaining years gardening, of all things, learning human techniques to grow earth flowers in Velthari soil. His garden became famous, visited by thousands who wanted to see the warrior who had learned to nurture instead of destroy. 5 years after the Crossroads Accord, the first joint settlement was established. It was on a neutral world that neither species had claimed, a small planet with breathable air and gentle seas. The settlement was called New Hope, and it was home to 10,000 humans and 10,000 Velthari. Dr. Sarah Chen was there for the opening ceremony. So was Velria, now the most respected diplomat in Velthari history. They walked together through the streets of the new city, watching human and Velthari children play together as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "They don't see the differences," Sarah observed. "They just see other children." "Children are wise in ways we forget as we age," Velria replied. "They see what is important, another being to play with, to learn from, to grow with." "Do you think this will last, this peace we built?" Velria was quiet for a long moment. Then she pointed to a small park where a human girl and a Velthari boy were building a sand castle together, their hands working in easy cooperation. "Look at them," she said. "They do not know they are supposed to be enemies. They only know they are friends. In 20 years, those children will be leaders. They will never understand how we could have killed each other. The war will be a story to them, a lesson in ancient foolishness. That is how peace lasts, not through treaties but through generations who grow up knowing nothing else." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. She had worked for this moment for years, sacrificed everything for it, and now it was here. It was real. It was beautiful. "We did this," she whispered. "We actually did this." "No," Velria corrected gently. "We only opened the door. They are the ones walking through it." That evening, there was a celebration in New Hope's central square. Music played, combining human melodies with Velthari rhythms. Food was shared, dishes from both worlds sitting side by side on long tables. Old enemies danced together under alien stars. Sarah stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. She thought about all the people who had died in the war, all the potential that had been lost, All the years that could have been peaceful if only someone had thought to ask, "What do we both need?" But she also thought about the future, the children who would grow up in a galaxy without war, the discoveries that would be made by scientists working together, the art that would be created by minds that had learned to see beauty in difference. It was not perfect, it would never be perfect, but it was better, so much better than it had been. Velria found her standing there and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, one that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Two beings from different species, holding hands, looking up at the same stars. "What are you thinking about?" Velria asked. "The future," Sarah replied. "I'm thinking about the future." The story of human Velthari peace became a legend in the wider galaxy. Other civilizations watched in amazement as two species that had been locked in total war transformed into close allies within a generation. Delegations came from across known space to study how it had been done. Sarah Chen spent her later years teaching. She founded an academy on Crossroads Station dedicated to conflict resolution, where students from dozens of species learned the principles that had ended the war. She never claimed to have all the answers, only to have found one set of answers for one particular conflict. "Every war is different," she told her students. "Every peace must be different too, but one thing is always true: peace that benefits only one side is not peace at all. It is just a slower kind of war. True peace, lasting peace, must give both sides something they need, something they could not get through fighting. That is the secret, not victory over your enemy but victory with them." Her final book, published when she was 92 years old, was simply titled Understanding. It became required reading at diplomatic academies across the galaxy. Its central thesis was simple: most wars continue not because one side is evil, but because both sides are afraid. Address the fear, offer real solutions to real problems, and peace becomes possible. Dr. Sarah Chen died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 97, surrounded by friends both human and Velthari. Velria was at her bedside, holding her hand at the end. The memorial service was held on Crossroads Station, the place where peace had been born. Representatives from every human world and every Velthari world attended. For the first time in galactic history, beings from both species wept together, mourning a common loss. The monument built in her honor stands in the center of New Hope's main square, next to the war memorial she had proposed so many years ago. It shows a simple image: two hands, one human and one Velthari, reaching toward each other. The inscription below reads, "She taught us that the strongest victory is one where no one loses." 20 years after the Crossroads Accord, the Human Velthari Alliance became the most powerful political entity in the galaxy. Not through conquest, but through partnership. Other species sought to join, attracted by the prosperity and stability that the alliance had achieved. The children who had played together in New Hope's parks became scientists, artists, diplomats, and leaders. They created wonders that neither species could have imagined alone. They reached further into space, discovered new worlds, and made contact with civilizations no one had ever known existed. And when they were asked how they had done it, how two species that had tried so hard to destroy each other had instead built something beautiful together, they always gave the same answer. "A human woman showed us that peace could benefit both sides," they would say, "and we chose to believe her." That was the true victory, not ships and weapons and territory conquered, but hearts and minds and futures shared. The war ended not with a surrender but with a handshake, not with defeat but with hope. And in the end, that made all the difference. In the quiet halls of the academy Sarah had founded, in the bustling streets of settlements where human and Velthari lived side by side, in the laughter of children who had never known war, her legacy lived on. It was not a perfect peace. There were still arguments, still disagreements, still moments when old wounds ached, but it was a real peace, a living peace, a peace that grew stronger with each passing year. The galaxy watched and learned. Other wars ended. Other enemies became allies. Other children grew up free from the fear that had haunted their ancestors. And somewhere across the vast distances of space, the universe seemed to smile. Two species that had once reached for each other's throats now reached for the stars together. It was, perhaps, the most human thing imaginable, and the most Velthari thing too. In the end, they had learned the greatest lesson of all, that victory is not found in the destruction of your enemy, but in their transformation into your friend. That peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of something better. That the future belongs not to those who conquer, but to those who understand. And that was how the Galactic War ended, not with the defeat of one side, but with the victory of both. Forever after, when beings throughout the galaxy spoke of humanity, they did not speak of a species that fought well. They spoke of a species that made peace well, a species that saw its enemies as potential partners, a species that offered benefits instead of ultimatums. They called it the human way, and slowly, generation by generation, it became the galactic way too. The stars had never seemed so bright.